The 20 shots rang out like a symphony of precision, each bullet finding its mark with surgical accuracy that defied everything the seasoned instructors at Canyon Ridge Shooting Academy thought they knew about marksmanship. Range Officer Tom Bradley stood frozen, his clipboard trembling in weathered hands as he stared at the target, downrange 20 perfect holes, clustered so tightly they could have been covered by a silver dollar. The woman he'd been mocking just moments before lowered her pistol with the calm confidence of someone who had never doubted the outcome. Her unconventional grip now revealed as the signature of a master rather than the fumbling of an amateur. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows across the outdoor firing range as Jessica Chun adjusted her safety glasses and tried to ignore the snickers echoing from the instructor's booth. At 28, she had grown accustomed to being underestimated, but today the stakes felt different. The quarterly firearms qualification at Canyon Ridge wasn't just another bureaucratic requirement. It was her last chance to prove she belonged in the field. Division of the Treasury Department's Financial Crimes Unit. Jessica's small frame and quiet demeanor had earned her the nickname Mouse among her colleagues, a moniker that followed her through 3 years of desk work, analyzing financial records and tracking money laundering operations. Her supervisor, Agent Patricia Morrison, had reluctantly agreed to let her attend the tactical training program after Jessica's latest case broke, an international banking conspiracy. But Morrison's skepticism was evident in every conversation they'd had about Jessica's field aspirations. Canyon Ridge Shooting Academy occupied a sprawling complex in the high desert of Arizona, its reputation built on training federal agents, military personnel, and elite security contractors. The facility's head instructor, Tom Bradley, was a former Marine drill sergeant whose 40-year career had made him a legend in law enforcement circles. His weathered face bore the scars of 2 decades in combat zones, and his gravelly voice carried the authority of someone who had seen every type of shooter walk through his range. Jessica had arrived at Canyon Ridge 2 weeks earlier as part of a mixed group of federal agents seeking advanced tactical certification. The cohort included seasoned FBI counterterrorism specialists, D agents fresh from cartel operations, and Secret Service protective details whose reputations preceded them. Among this collection of hardened professionals, Jessica stood out like a librarian at a biker convention. Her first day at the academy had been a disaster of epic proportions. During the initial assessment, Jessica's unconventional pistol grip, a modified Weaver stance she'd developed through years of secret practice, had drawn immediate attention from Bradley. His booming voice had carried across the range as he demonstrated what he called proper technique to the assembled group, using Jessica as an example of everything wrong with amateur shooting. "Ladies and gentlemen," Bradley had announced, his voice dripping with condescension, "this is what happens when someone learns to shoot from YouTube videos instead of proper instruction. Notice how she's holding the weapon like she's afraid it might bite her. That grip might work for plinking cans in the backyard, but it'll get you killed in a real firefight." The other students had chuckled appreciatively, grateful that someone else was bearing the brunt of Bradley's attention. Jessica had felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment, but she'd said nothing, simply nodding along as Bradley repositioned her hands into what he considered the correct grip. The modified stance felt awkward and unstable, nothing like the technique she'd spent countless hours perfecting in the abandoned quarry outside her hometown. What Bradley and the other students didn't know was that Jessica's unusual grip was the result of 15 years of intensive training under the guidance of her grandfather, Chun Wei-Ming, a former Taiwanese Special Forces operator who had immigrated to the United States in the 1970s. Wei-Ming had been one of the most decorated marksmen in the Republic of China Armed Forces, his skills honed during the tense standoffs across the Taiwan Strait during the Cold War era. Jessica's childhood had been shaped by weekend trips to remote locations where her grandfather would teach her not just marksmanship, but the philosophy and discipline that separated true shooters from casual enthusiasts. Wei Ming's approach to firearms training was holistic, incorporating breathing techniques borrowed from traditional Chinese martial arts, meditation practices that improved focus and emotional control, and physical conditioning that built the stamina necessary for sustained accuracy. The modified grip that had drawn Bradley's ridicule was actually a hybrid technique that Wei Ming had developed during his military service, combining elements of traditional shooting stances with adjustments that accommodated the smaller hand, size, and different center of gravity that many Asian shooters possessed. The technique had been battle-tested in numerous conflicts, but it looked unconventional to instructors trained in American military doctrine. Wei Ming had died when Jessica was 21, taking with him not just his knowledge of advanced marksmanship techniques, but also the stories of his service that had never been officially recorded. The Taiwanese military's operations during the Cold War remained classified, and Wei Ming's contributions to American intelligence gathering had been buried in files that would never see daylight. Jessica was left with his teachings, a collection of modified weapons that he had legally imported and registered, and a deep understanding of shooting fundamentals that she had never been able to demonstrate in professional settings. Her career with the Treasury Department had begun in the Financial Crimes Unit's Analytical Division, where her background in economics and her fluency in Mandarin Chinese made her invaluable for tracking money flows through Asian banking networks. Jessica's work had resulted in several major cases involving cryptocurrency laundering operations and trade-based money laundering schemes, but her contributions were largely invisible to the agents who made the arrests and testified in court. The transition from analytical work to field operations represented a significant career shift that many of her colleagues viewed with skepticism. Financial crimes investigators were typically recruited from accounting and business backgrounds, not trained as tactical operators. The assumption was that Jessica's desire for field work was motivated by a desire for excitement rather than genuine aptitude, and her quiet demeanor did nothing to dispel those concerns. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Agent Morrison had been reluctant to approve Jessica's application for tactical training, but the success of her latest investigation had created political pressure to give her a chance. Jessica's analysis of blockchain transactions had uncovered a network of shell companies being used to launder money for a Mexican cartel, leading to coordinated raids across 3 states and the seizure of over $50 million in assets. The case had generated significant media attention and praise from Treasury Department leadership, making it difficult for Morrison to continue blocking Jessica's advancement. The 2 weeks at Canyon Ridge had been a constant struggle against preconceptions and institutional bias. Jessica's performance in physical training had been adequate but unremarkable, her tactical knowledge solid but theoretical, and her weapons handling cautious to the point of appearing timid. Bradley had made no secret of his opinion that she was wasting everyone's time, and several of the other students had begun treating her as a mascot rather than a peer. The breaking point had come during a close-quarters combat exercise where Jessica's hesitation to engage targets aggressively had resulted in her death in multiple scenarios. Bradley's post-exercise debrief had been particularly harsh, questioning not just her tactical decisions, but her fundamental suitability for field work. The other students had avoided eye contact during the critique, their discomfort palpable as Bradley's criticism became increasingly personal. "Chun," Bradley had said, his voice carrying the weight of final judgment, "I've been training federal agents for 2 decades, and I can tell you right now that you don't have what it takes for field operations. You're a fine analyst, and there's no shame in that. But carrying a gun in the real world requires a different kind of person. Someone who can make split-second decisions under pressure, someone who won't freeze when lives are on the line. Jessica had listened to the criticism without responding, her face impassive despite the turmoil she felt inside. She understood that Bradley's assessment was based on legitimate observations of her performance, but she also knew that he was seeing only a fraction of her capabilities. The training exercises at Canyon Ridge bore little resemblance to the precision shooting that her grandfather had taught her, and the psychological pressure of performing for skeptical audiences was far different from the meditative focus she achieved during solo practice sessions. That evening, Jessica had called her apartment in Washington, D.C., and spoken with her roommate, Linda Torres, a fellow Treasury Department employee who worked in the currency and banking division. Linda had been Jessica's closest friend since their training academy days, and she was one of the few people who knew about Jessica's family background and her grandfather's military service. "They don't understand what you're capable of," Linda had said after Jessica described the day's events. "You've been holding back because you're afraid of standing out, but maybe it's time to show them what Wei Ming taught you. You can't spend your whole career hiding your abilities because other people are uncomfortable with excellence." The conversation had forced Jessica to confront the truth about her own behavior at Canyon Ridge. She had been unconsciously suppressing her natural shooting ability, trying to fit into the mold of what the instructors expected from a financial crimes analyst. The result had been a performance that satisfied no one and confirmed everyone's preconceptions about her limitations. The decision to reveal her true capabilities had not been made lightly. Jessica understood that demonstrating exceptional marksmanship skills would raise questions about her background and training that she might not be able to answer satisfactorily. Her grandfather's military service remained classified, and many of the techniques he had taught her were not part of standard American training doctrine. Standing out as an extraordinary shooter would inevitably lead to scrutiny that could complicate her career in ways she couldn't predict. But the alternative was accepting a return to analytical work and abandoning her goal of field operations, a prospect that felt like betraying everything her grandfather had taught her about courage and perseverance. Wei Ming had often told her that exceptional abilities carried the responsibility to use them when circumstances demanded, and Jessica was beginning to understand that those circumstances had arrived. The night before the final qualification, Jessica had driven to a remote section of the desert outside Canyon Ridge and practiced with her grandfather's modified pistol, a customized Smith & Wesson that had been his service weapon during his military career. The gun felt like an extension of her body, its weight and balance perfectly suited to the grip technique that Bradley had mocked. Under the desert stars, Jessica had run through the qualification course repeatedly, each shot finding its mark with the precision that 15 years of training had made automatic. The morning of the qualification dawned clear and hot, with the kind of crystalline visibility that made the desert mountains seem close enough to touch. Jessica had arrived at the range early, spending time in meditation using the breathing techniques her grandfather had taught her. The process of centering herself had become a ritual that connected her to Wei Ming's memory and to the deeper purpose behind her training. Bradley had begun the day with his usual briefing about the importance of the qualification and the standards that would be required for passing. His eyes had lingered on Jessica as he described the consequences of failure, making it clear that he expected her to join the small percentage of candidates who didn't meet the minimum requirements. The other students had listened with the confidence of professionals who had passed similar tests dozens of times. Their attention focused more on the scoring system than on the fundamentals of marksmanship. The qualification course at Canyon Ridge was more challenging than standard federal agency requirements, incorporating elements of combat shooting that reflected the Academy's reputation for excellence. Candidates were required to engage targets at distances from 7 to 50 yards, using both strong hand and weak hand shooting positions, and demonstrating accuracy under time pressure that simulated real-world conditions. Jessica had been assigned to firing position 12, which placed her in the middle of the line of 20 candidates. The position offered no advantages in terms of wind conditions or target visibility, but it did provide her with the opportunity to observe the performance of other shooters before her turn came. As she watched her classmates engage their targets with varying degrees of success, Jessica felt the familiar sense of calm that preceded her best shooting. The first stage of the qualification required candidates to fire 5 shots from the 25-yard line using a standard isosceles stance. Jessica had taken her position and raised her weapon, immediately falling into the modified grip that Bradley had criticized throughout the training program. The stance felt natural and stable, her body automatically adjusting to accommodate the technique that her grandfather had drilled into her through thousands of repetitions. Bradley had been walking behind the firing line, observing each candidate's technique and calling out corrections when necessary. When he reached Jessica's position, he had stopped and shaken his head with visible frustration. Her grip was exactly what he had been trying to correct for 2 weeks, and her deliberate return to the incorrect technique seemed like a direct challenge to his authority. "Chun," Bradley had called out, his voice carrying across the range. "What did we discuss about that grip? You're holding that weapon like it's a garden hose, not a precision instrument. Reset your stance and do it right." Jessica had lowered her weapon and turned to face Bradley, her expression calm despite the attention she was drawing from the other candidates. For a moment, she had considered complying with his instruction and reverting to the grip he preferred. But Linda's words from the previous evening echoed in her mind. The time for hiding her abilities had passed, and the consequences of that decision would have to be accepted. "Sir," Jessica had replied, her voice quiet but clear, "I understand your concerns about my technique, but I'd like to request permission to complete the qualification using the grip I'm most comfortable with. I believe it will allow me to demonstrate my best performance." The request had been unusual enough to draw attention from candidates at neighboring positions, and several of the instructors had moved closer to observe the exchange. Bradley's face had darkened with annoyance, and for a moment it seemed like he might refuse the request outright. But the formal nature of Jessica's phrasing and the presence of other instructors had forced him to consider the situation more carefully. "Fine," Bradley had said finally, his voice carrying clear skepticism. "You want to fail using your backyard technique, that's your choice. But don't expect any sympathy when you're packing your bags tomorrow." The exchange had established the stakes for Jessica's performance in terms that everyone on the range understood. She was not just attempting to qualify for field operations. She was challenging the authority and expertise of one of the most respected firearms instructors in federal law enforcement. The other candidates had watched with mixture of anticipation and concern, recognizing that Jessica's decision would have consequences regardless of her performance. Jessica had returned to her firing position and raised her weapon, settling into the modified stance with the fluidity that came from years of practice. The weight of the pistol felt perfectly balanced in her hands, and her sight picture was sharp and clear despite the bright desert sun. She had taken 3 deep breaths using the technique her grandfather had taught her, each exhalation releasing tension and bringing her closer to the meditative state that preceded her best shooting. The command to commence firing had echoed across the range, and Jessica had begun the most important shooting performance of her career. Her first shot had been a deliberate center hit, the bullet striking the target with an audible impact that carried clearly in the desert air. The second shot had followed immediately, placed with the same precision as the first, and Jessica had felt the familiar rhythm of perfect shooting begin to establish itself. By the time she had completed the first stage of the qualification, Jessica's targets showed a grouping that was tighter than anything the other candidates had achieved. The 5 shots formed a cluster that could have been covered by a quarter, each bullet striking within the highest scoring ring of the target. Bradley had observed the performance with growing surprise, his skepticism beginning to give way to professional interest in what he was witnessing. The second stage of the qualification required candidates to engage targets from the 15-yard line using both strong hand and weak hand shooting positions. This portion of the test was designed to evaluate a shooter's ability to maintain accuracy when forced to use their non-dominant hand, a skill that was essential for field operations where injuries or tactical situations might compromise normal shooting positions. Jessica had completed the strong hand portion of the stage with the same precision she had demonstrated in the first stage, her shots forming another impossibly tight group in the center of the target. But it was her weak hand shooting that truly captured the attention of everyone on the range. Using only her left hand to control the weapon, Jessica had delivered 5 shots with accuracy that matched her strong hand performance, a feat that even experienced shooters found extremely challenging. The technique she employed for weak hand shooting was another modification that her grandfather had developed, incorporating elements of traditional archery principles to provide stability and control when using the non-dominant hand. The result was a shooting style that looked unconventional but produced results that spoke for themselves. Bradley had moved closer to Jessica's position, his professional curiosity now fully engaged by the demonstration of skills that defied his expectations. The third stage of the qualification was designed to test candidates' ability to transition between different shooting positions while maintaining accuracy and speed. Shooters were required to engage targets from prone, kneeling, and standing positions, with time limits that forced them to move quickly between positions while maintaining precision. This stage typically separated the tactical shooters from the recreational marksmen, as it required physical conditioning and mental discipline that many candidates struggled to maintain. Jessica had approached the third stage with the same methodical precision she had displayed throughout the qualification. But her performance during this segment revealed capabilities that went far beyond simple marksmanship. Her transitions between positions were fluid and efficient, each movement economical and purposeful in a way that suggested extensive training in tactical shooting. More importantly, her accuracy remained consistent regardless of her shooting position, with each shot placed in the center of the target with mechanical precision. The prone shooting position, which many candidates found challenging due to the physical demands of supporting the weapon while lying down, seemed to be Jessica's strongest technique. Her shots from this position formed a group that was even tighter than her previous performance, with all 5 bullets striking within a circle that could have been covered by a dime. Bradley had knelt beside her position to observe her technique more closely, his professional interest now completely overriding his initial skepticism. The kneeling position, which required shooters to balance stability with speed, showcased Jessica's ability to adapt her technique to different physical constraints while maintaining the same level of precision. Her modified grip provided excellent control in this position, and her shots continued to find the center of the target with consistency that was drawing attention from candidates at other firing positions. The standing position, traditionally the most challenging for precision shooting, was where Jessica's unconventional technique truly shone. The stability provided by her modified grip allowed her to maintain perfect sight alignment, despite the inherent instability of the standing position, and her shots formed another impossibly tight group in the center of the target. By this point, several of the other instructors had gathered behind Jessica's position to observe her technique, their professional interest piqued by the demonstration of capabilities that exceeded anything they had seen from federal agency candidates. The fourth and final stage of the qualification was designed to test candidates' ability to perform under extreme time pressure while maintaining accuracy standards. Shooters were required to engage multiple targets at different distances within strict time limits, simulating the kind of rapid decision-making and precise shooting that might be required in actual field operations. This stage had the highest failure rate among candidates, as the combination of time pressure and accuracy requirements often proved too challenging for all but the most skilled shooters. Jessica had approached the final stage with the same calm confidence she had displayed throughout the qualification, but the complexity of the stage required her to demonstrate additional capabilities that she had not yet revealed. The stage required shooters to engage targets at 7, 15, and 25 yards in a predetermined sequence, with time limits that forced rapid transitions between different distances and shooting positions. Her performance during the final stage was nothing short of extraordinary. Jessica moved through the sequence of targets with fluid efficiency, her shots finding their marks with precision that defied the time constraints of the exercise. Her transitions between distances were smooth and controlled, and her accuracy remained consistent regardless of the range or the pressure of the time limits. Each shot was placed in the center of its target with mechanical precision, and her overall time for the stage was faster than any of the other candidates had achieved. When the ceasefire command echoed across the range, Jessica had completed the most impressive shooting performance that anyone at Canyon Ridge had witnessed in years. Her targets showed groupings that were tighter than anything typically achieved by federal agency candidates, and her overall score was perfect, a feat that was extremely rare even among the most experienced shooters. Bradley had walked downrange to examine Jessica's targets personally, his weathered face showing a mixture of surprise and professional respect that had been completely absent at the beginning of the day. The other instructors had followed him, their conversation subdued as they processed what they had witnessed. The candidates who had completed their own qualifications had gathered behind the firing line, their attention focused on the targets. That represented a level of shooting that few of them had ever seen. The examination of Jessica's targets confirmed what everyone on the range already knew. She had delivered a performance that redefined their understanding of what was possible. From a federal agency candidate, her shots formed clusters that were tighter than anything typically achieved by competitive shooters, and her consistency across all stages of the qualification was unprecedented in the Academy's history. Bradley had returned to the firing line. With Jessica's targets in hand, his expression thoughtful as he processed the implications of what he had witnessed. The woman he had been dismissing as unsuitable for field operations had just demonstrated shooting capabilities that exceeded those of most tactical officers, and her unconventional technique had proven to be far more effective than the standard doctrine he had been teaching for decades. The silence on the range was broken by the sound of Bradley clearing his throat, a gesture that drew the attention of everyone present. Jessica remained at her firing position, her weapon secured, and her expression calm despite the scrutiny she was receiving from the assembled instructors and candidates. The moment felt heavy with significance, as if everyone present understood that they had witnessed something exceptional that would be remembered long after the qualification was over. "Chun," Bradley said finally, his voice carrying a tone of respect that had been absent from all their previous interactions, "I owe you an apology. That was the finest shooting performance I've seen in 20 years of training federal agents. Your technique may be unconventional, but the results speak for themselves. I'd like to know where you learned to shoot like that." The question hung in the air like a challenge, and Jessica understood that her answer would determine not just her own future, but potentially the careers of other candidates who might not fit the traditional mold of federal tactical officers. Her grandfather's teachings had emphasized the importance of humility and respect for one's instructors, but they had also stressed the need to stand up for what was right when circumstances demanded it. "My grandfather taught me," Jessica replied, her voice steady despite the attention she was receiving. "He was a military marksman, and he believed that technique should be adapted to the individual shooter rather than forcing everyone into the same mold. He taught me that precision comes from understanding yourself and your equipment, not from following rules that might not work for everyone." The explanation was simple but profound, and it carried implications that went far beyond Jessica's individual performance. Bradley nodded slowly, his professional experience allowing him to recognize the wisdom in what she had said. The other instructors exchanged glances. Their own teaching methods suddenly opened to question in light of what they had witnessed. "Well," Bradley said finally, a smile beginning to form on his weathered face, "I guess your grandfather knew what he was talking about. That was shooting at a level that most people never achieve, regardless of their training. You've earned my respect, and you've definitely earned your place in field operations." The validation was everything Jessica had hoped for, but it also represented the beginning of a new chapter in her career that would bring its own challenges and opportunities. Her performance at Canyon Ridge had established her as an exceptional shooter, but it had also raised questions about her background and training that she would need to address as she moved forward in her career. The other candidates had begun to congratulate Jessica on her performance, their earlier skepticism replaced by genuine admiration for what she had accomplished. Several of the instructors had approached her with questions about her technique, their professional interest in her methods obvious despite their years of experience with conventional training doctrine. As Jessica packed her equipment and prepared to leave the range, she felt a sense of satisfaction that went beyond her individual achievement. She had honored her grandfather's memory by demonstrating the effectiveness of his teachings, and she had opened a door for other candidates who might not fit the traditional expectations of federal tactical training. The mouse had found her. Roar, and the sound would echo through the halls of Canyon Ridge for years to come. The weeks following Jessica's qualification at Canyon Ridge brought changes that rippled through her life like stones thrown into still water. Agent Morrison's expression had shifted from skeptical tolerance to grudging respect when the Academy's report arrived on her desk, complete with Bradley's handwritten recommendation that Jessica be fast-tracked for advanced tactical assignments. The same woman who had questioned Jessica's suitability for field work was now fielding calls from other divisions requesting her services for high-priority operations. Jessica's new reputation as an exceptional marksman had spread through federal law enforcement circles with the speed that only truly remarkable achievements could generate. Word of her performance had reached the FBI's hostage rescue team, the Secret Service's counter-assault team, and even the elite tactical units within Homeland Security. Each organization was curious about the quiet analyst who had somehow mastered shooting techniques that their own specialists struggled to achieve. The transformation in how her colleagues treated her was both gratifying and unsettling. Agents who had previously dismissed her as a desk jockey now sought her advice on firearm selection and training methods. The same people who had rolled their eyes when she expressed interest in field operations were now asking if she would consider transferring to their units. Jessica found herself navigating a professional landscape that had been completely reconfigured by 20 perfect shots, delivered under pressure. But with recognition came scrutiny, and Jessica soon discovered that exceptional performance in federal service inevitably led to questions about background, training, and loyalties. The Treasury Department's Internal Security Division had begun what they called a routine review of her clearance status, but Jessica understood that nothing about the investigation was routine. Her grandfather's military service, previously a footnote in her personnel file, had become a subject of intense interest to investigators who were tasked with understanding how a financial analyst had acquired tactical shooting skills that exceeded those of career operators. The first indication that her life was about to become significantly more complicated came in the form of a meeting request from Deputy Director Richard Hawkins, the Treasury Department's liaison to the intelligence community. Hawkins was a career civil servant whose responsibilities included coordinating with other agencies on matters that crossed jurisdictional boundaries, and his interest in Jessica suggested that her shooting performance had attracted attention from organizations that operated in shadows rather than courtrooms. Hawkins' office occupied a corner of the Treasury building that most employees never visited, its windows offering a view of the White House that served as a constant reminder of the political dimensions of federal law enforcement. The deputy Director was a thin man in his early 60s whose careful demeanor and precise speech patterns reflected decades of navigating the complex relationships between agencies that often competed as much as they cooperated. "Miss Chun," Hawkins had said as Jessica took her seat across from his desk, "I want to begin by congratulating you on your performance at Canyon Ridge. It's rare to see such exceptional marksmanship from someone without formal military or law enforcement background, and your instructors were genuinely impressed by your capabilities." The compliment felt like the opening move in a chess game whose rules Jessica didn't fully understand, and she found herself thinking about the strategic lessons her grandfather had taught her alongside his instruction in marksmanship. Wei Ming had often emphasized that the most dangerous conflicts were those where the participants operated according to different sets of assumptions, and Jessica sensed that her conversation with Hawkins would require careful navigation of unstated agendas. "Thank you, sir," Jessica had replied, keeping her response neutral while she tried to assess what Hawkins actually wanted from their meeting. "I was fortunate to have excellent instruction growing up, and I've always taken firearms training." "Seriously?" Hawkins had smiled at her response, but the expression didn't reach his eyes. "Yes, about that instruction. I've been reviewing your personnel file, and I have to admit that I'm curious about your grandfather's background." Chen Wei Ming served in the Republic of China Armed Forces during a particularly interesting period in their history, and his records suggest that he had capabilities that went well beyond conventional military training. The statement was simultaneously a question and a warning, and Jessica understood that her answer would determine the direction of not just their conversation but potentially her entire career. Her grandfather's service record was officially classified, but Jessica had always suspected that his activities during the Cold War had involved cooperation with American intelligence agencies. The techniques he had taught her bore the hallmarks of special operations training that went far beyond what conventional military marksmen would have received. "My grandfather was a proud veteran who served his country with distinction," Jessica had said carefully, choosing her words with the precision she applied to financial analysis. "He taught me that marksmanship was both a skill and a discipline, and that excellence required dedication and practice. Beyond that, he was a private man who didn't discuss the details of his military service." Hawkins had nodded as if he had expected exactly that response, and Jessica realized that her answer was probably being compared to information that had been gathered from other sources. The deputy director's interest in her grandfather's background suggested that Wei Ming's activities during his military service were known to American intelligence agencies, and that Jessica's exceptional shooting performance had triggered review of connections that had been dormant for decades. "I understand your grandfather's desire for privacy," Hawkins had continued, his tone suggesting that he understood far more than he was willing to discuss directly. "What I'm curious about is whether he shared any perspectives on international relations or intelligence operations during your training sessions. Sometimes veterans of that era had insights into geopolitical situations that aren't captured in official records." The question was more direct than Jessica had expected, and she found herself in the uncomfortable position of having to decide how much truth she could safely reveal. Wei Ming had indeed shared stories about his military service, including operations that had involved cooperation with American forces and intelligence agencies. But those stories had been told in confidence, and Jessica wasn't certain whether revealing them would honor her grandfather's memory or betray his trust. "My grandfather focused primarily on the technical aspects of marksmanship," Jessica had replied, maintaining the cautious tone that seemed appropriate for their conversation. "He occasionally mentioned that military service taught him the importance of precision and discipline, but he generally kept his training separate from discussions of politics or international affairs." Hawkins had studied her face as she spoke, his expression suggesting that he was evaluating not just her words, but the way she delivered them. Jessica had the distinct impression that her responses were being measured against a template of expectations that had been established before their meeting began, and that her performance during this conversation might be as important as her shooting demonstration at Canyon Ridge. "Well," Hawkins had said finally, "I appreciate your candor about your grandfather's influence on your training. The reason I wanted to speak with you today is that your exceptional performance has generated interest from several agencies that deal with specialized threats. There are situations where precise marksmanship is essential, and operators with your capabilities are extremely valuable assets." The use of the word assets had not been accidental, and Jessica understood that Hawkins was suggesting a shift in her career that would move her from traditional law enforcement into areas that operated according to different rules and different levels of accountability. The intelligence community's interest in her capabilities was flattering, but it also represented a path that would take her far from the financial crimes work that had originally attracted her to federal service. "I'm honored by their interest," Jessica had said, maintaining the diplomatic tone that seemed appropriate for discussing sensitive career opportunities. "I've always been committed to serving in whatever capacity would be most beneficial to national security, though I admit I hadn't anticipated that my marksmanship skills would generate this level of attention." Hawkins had smiled again, and this time the expression seemed more genuine. "Exceptional capabilities have a way of creating unexpected opportunities, Ms. Chun. The question is whether you're prepared to explore assignments that might require you to operate in environments that are quite different from traditional financial crimes investigation." The conversation had continued for another 30 minutes, with Hawkins providing vague descriptions of potential assignments that would utilize Jessica's marksmanship skills in contexts that sounded more like military operations than law enforcement activities. By the time the meeting concluded, Jessica understood that her 20 perfect shots had opened doors to opportunities that she had never imagined, but also to responsibilities that came with risks she was only beginning to understand. The weeks that followed her meeting with Hawkins brought a series of conversations with representatives from agencies that operated under levels of classification that required her to sign additional security agreements before discussions could even begin. Each meeting followed a similar pattern, with career intelligence officers expressing interest in her capabilities while carefully avoiding specific details about how those capabilities might be employed. The most intriguing conversation came with Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a psychologist who worked for an organization that was never explicitly identified but was clearly connected to the intelligence community. Mitchell's interest was not in Jessica's marksmanship skills, but in the mental processes that enabled her to perform under pressure, and their conversation revealed aspects of her grandfather's training that Jessica had never fully appreciated. "Your performance at Canyon Ridge suggests exceptional emotional control under stress," Mitchell had observed during their meeting in a nondescript office building in downtown Washington. "That kind of psychological stability is relatively rare, and it's often the result of specific training methods that go beyond simple marksmanship instruction. I'm curious about the mental techniques your grandfather taught you alongside the physical skills." Jessica had found herself describing the meditation practices and breathing techniques that Wei Ming had incorporated into her training, methods that she had always assumed were simply tools for improving accuracy. Mitchell's questions revealed that these techniques were actually sophisticated approaches to stress management that were used by elite military units and intelligence operatives to maintain performance in high-pressure situations. "Your grandfather appears to have understood principles of psychological conditioning that are typically associated with special operations training," Mitchell had said, her tone suggesting professional admiration for techniques that were clearly outside the scope of conventional marksmanship instruction. "The integration of meditation practices with firearms training is particularly interesting, as it suggests an approach to skill development that treats the mind and body as a unified system." The conversation had helped Jessica understand that her exceptional shooting performance was the result of training methods that were far more sophisticated than she had realized, and that her grandfather's background likely included exposure to psychological techniques that were normally classified at the highest levels. The realization was both enlightening and troubling, as it suggested that Wei Ming's influence on her development had been more significant than either of them had acknowledged during his lifetime. As federal agencies continued to express interest in her capabilities, Jessica found herself grappling with questions about her own identity and career goals that went far beyond simple professional advancement. The marksmanship skills that her grandfather had taught her were opening doors to opportunities that would allow her to serve her country in ways that she had never imagined. But those same opportunities came with obligations and risks that would fundamentally change the trajectory of her life. The decision about whether to pursue assignments with the intelligence community was complicated by Jessica's growing understanding of her grandfather's true background and the implications of the training he had provided. If Wei Ming had indeed been involved in classified operations during his military service, then her exceptional capabilities might be seen not just as individual achievements, but as evidence of a family legacy that connected her to historical events that were still considered sensitive by multiple governments. The complexity of her situation became clear during a conversation with Agent Morrison, who had been briefed on the various opportunities that were being offered to Jessica by other agencies. Morrison's perspective was that of a career law enforcement officer who understood the differences between traditional federal service and the more ambiguous world of intelligence operations, and her advice reflected concerns that went beyond simple career advancement. "Jessica," Morrison had said during a private meeting in her office, "I want you to understand that the opportunities being offered to you represent a significant departure from conventional law enforcement work. The agencies that are expressing interest in your capabilities operate under different rules and different levels of accountability than what you're accustomed to in financial crimes investigation." Morrison's warning was both professional advice and personal concern, and Jessica appreciated the older agent's willingness to discuss the potential downsides of opportunities that many people would consider prestigious assignments. The conversation forced Jessica to confront the reality that her exceptional marksmanship performance had attracted attention from organizations whose missions were often at odds with the transparency and legal procedures that govern traditional federal law enforcement. "I understand that these opportunities come with additional responsibilities and risks," Jessica had replied, though she wasn't certain that she truly comprehended the full implications of what was being offered. "I'm trying to evaluate whether my skills would be best utilized in traditional law enforcement or in more specialized assignments." Morrison had studied Jessica's face as she spoke, her expression suggesting that she was weighing how much advice she could appropriately provide about career decisions that involved classified considerations. "My concern is that your exceptional capabilities might be seen by some people as tools to be utilized rather than talents to be developed. The intelligence community can provide opportunities for service that aren't available in traditional law enforcement, but those opportunities often come with personal costs that aren't immediately apparent." The conversation with Morrison had highlighted the central dilemma that Jessica faced as various agencies continued to recruit her for specialized assignments. Her marksmanship skills were undeniably exceptional, and she had a genuine desire to serve her country in whatever capacity would be most beneficial. But the path that was being offered to her would take her away from the financial crimes work that had originally motivated her federal service, and into areas where the moral complexities of intelligence operations might conflict with the straightforward pursuit of justice that had attracted her to law enforcement. The decision became more urgent when Deputy Director Hawkins informed her that several agencies were prepared to make formal offers for her services, but that those offers would require responses within a limited time frame. The pressure to make a decision about her career direction was intensified by the realization that declining these opportunities might result in her being perceived as uncooperative by organizations that valued loyalty and commitment above individual preferences. Jessica's internal conflict about her career direction was further complicated by her growing awareness that her grandfather's influence on her development had been more profound than she had previously understood. The training methods that Wei Ming had taught her were clearly the result of exposure to techniques that were normally reserved for elite military and intelligence personnel, and her exceptional performance was evidence of capabilities that had been developed through systematic instruction that went far beyond casual mentorship. The possibility that her grandfather had been involved in classified operations during his military service raised questions about her own background that she was not certain she wanted answered. If Wei Ming had indeed worked with American intelligence agencies during the Cold War, then her recruitment by similar organizations might be seen as a continuation of family connections rather than recognition of individual merit. The distinction was important to Jessica, who had always prided herself on achieving success through her own efforts rather than through inherited advantages. The weight of these considerations was intensified by Jessica's realization that her decision about her career direction would have implications that extended beyond her individual circumstances. If she accepted assignments with intelligence agencies, she would be following a path that connected her to her grandfather's legacy in ways that might honor his memory or might compromise the privacy that he had sought to maintain about his military service. The choice represented not just a career decision, but a judgment about how best to respect the sacrifices that Wei Ming had made for his family's security and freedom. As Jessica continued to wrestle with these complex considerations, she found herself returning to the shooting techniques that her grandfather had taught her, using the meditation and breathing practices as tools for achieving the mental clarity that would allow her to make an informed decision about her future. The irony was not lost on her that the same skills that had created her current opportunities were also the tools she relied upon to navigate the challenges that those opportunities presented. The process of decision-making was further complicated by Jessica's growing understanding that her exceptional marksmanship capabilities were just one aspect of a much broader set of skills that her grandfather had developed in her through years of systematic training. The psychological techniques, the tactical awareness, and the disciplined approach to problem-solving that Wei Ming had instilled in her were all components of a comprehensive preparation that seemed designed to enable her to operate effectively in high-stress environments that required both technical competence and emotional stability. The realization that her grandfather had essentially prepared her for exactly the kind of assignments that were now being offered by intelligence agencies raised profound questions about Wei Ming's motivations and expectations for her future. Had he anticipated that his training would eventually lead her toward opportunities in the intelligence community, or had he simply been providing her with skills that would enable her to protect herself and serve her country in whatever capacity circumstances might require? These questions became more pressing as Jessica realized that her decision about her career direction would need to be made without the benefit of her grandfather's guidance or advice. Wei Ming had died before her federal service began, and she was left to interpret his teachings and apply his lessons to situations that he had never explicitly prepared her to face. The autonomy that came with making her own career decisions was both empowering and isolating as she grappled with choices that would determine not just her professional future, but her relationship with her grandfather's legacy. The complexity of Jessica's situation was further heightened by her awareness that the agencies expressing interest in her capabilities were evaluating not just her marksmanship skills, but her psychological profile, her family background, and her potential for development into roles that might require her to operate in environments where traditional moral boundaries were often ambiguous. The assessment process was thorough and invasive, involving interviews, psychological evaluations, and background investigations that probed aspects of her life that she had never expected to become subjects of official scrutiny. The most challenging aspect of this evaluation process was Jessica's realization that her responses to questions about her grandfather's background and training methods were being analyzed for consistency and truthfulness in ways that suggested her interviewers possessed information that she had never been given access to. The possibility that Wei Ming's military service was documented in classified files that contained details he had never shared with his family was both intriguing and disturbing, as it suggested that her understanding of her grandfather's legacy might be incomplete or inaccurate. The pressure to make a decision about her career direction intensified when Jessica learned that her exceptional performance at Canyon Ridge had generated interest from international law enforcement agencies that were seeking to recruit American personnel for specialized assignments involving transnational crime and terrorism. The global dimension of the opportunities being offered to her expanded the scope of potential service beyond domestic law enforcement to include operations that would take her to countries where her grandfather's military experience and her own language skills might provide significant advantages. The international aspect of these opportunities was particularly appealing to Jessica, as it represented a chance to utilize not just her marksmanship skills, but also the cultural knowledge and linguistic abilities that her upbringing in a multicultural family had provided. The possibility of serving in assignments that would allow her to honor her grandfather's memory while contributing to international security efforts seemed to offer a resolution to the conflicting demands of personal loyalty and professional service that had been troubling her throughout the recruitment process. But the international dimension of the opportunities also introduced additional complexities related to the political sensitivities surrounding her grandfather's background and the potential for her assignments to involve operations in regions where Wei Ming's military service might be viewed as controversial or problematic. The possibility that her family history could become a liability in certain operational contexts was a consideration that she had not previously contemplated, and it added another layer of complexity to her decision-making process. As Jessica continued to evaluate her options and prepare for what seemed like an inevitable transition away from traditional financial crimes investigation, she found herself reflecting on the lessons that her grandfather had taught her about service, sacrifice, and the responsibilities that came with exceptional capabilities. Wei Ming had often emphasized that skills and talents carried obligations to use them in service of larger purposes, and that individual success was meaningful only when it contributed to the welfare of others. The challenge that Jessica faced was determining how to apply those principles to career decisions that involved considerations she had never anticipated and responsibilities she was only beginning to understand. The path forward required her to balance her desire to honor her grandfather's memory with her own aspirations for meaningful service, while navigating the complex political and operational realities of modern intelligence work. The weight of these considerations was intensified by Jessica's growing awareness that her decision would not just affect her own future, but would also determine how her grandfather's legacy would be remembered and honored by the agencies and organizations that were seeking to recruit her. The opportunity to serve in roles that would utilize the full range of capabilities that Wei Ming had developed in her represented both a tribute to his training and a test of whether she was worthy of the sacrifice he had made to provide her with those capabilities. As the deadline for responding to the various recruitment offers approached, Jessica found herself returning again and again to the fundamental question of how she could best serve her country, while remaining true to the values and principles that her grandfather had instilled in her. The answer would determine not just her career trajectory, but her understanding of what it meant to inherit and honor a legacy that connected her to historical events and ongoing responsibilities that were far larger than her individual circumstances. The manila envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by courier to Jessica's apartment with instructions that it be opened only in private. The weight of the package and the multiple security seals suggested contents that went far beyond routine correspondence, and Jessica found herself staring at the official markings for several minutes before breaking the seals with hands that trembled slightly despite her best efforts to remain calm. Inside the envelope were documents that would fundamentally alter her understanding of her grandfather's life and her own place in the complex web of international intelligence relationships that had shaped global politics for decades. The first document was a declassified summary of Operation Nightingale, a joint intelligence operation between American and Taiwanese forces during the 1970s that had never been acknowledged in official histories. Her grandfather's name appeared throughout the document, not as a peripheral participant, but as one of the primary architects of an operation that had prevented a significant escalation of tensions in the Taiwan Strait. The revelation that Wei Ming had been deeply involved in classified intelligence operations was both shocking and oddly comforting, as it explained many of the inconsistencies in his stories and the sophisticated nature of the training he had provided to Jessica. The documents revealed that her grandfather had not simply been a skilled marksman, but had been one of Taiwan's most valuable intelligence assets, with capabilities that extended far beyond conventional military training into areas of psychological operations, deep cover work, and strategic planning. More disturbing was the second document, which detailed the circumstances surrounding Wei Ming's immigration to the United States and the ongoing surveillance that had been maintained on his activities throughout his civilian life. The file revealed that American intelligence agencies had considered him a potential security risk due to his knowledge of classified operations, but had ultimately concluded that his loyalty to his adopted country was absolute and his discretion could be trusted. The surveillance had continued until his death, with regular assessments of his activities and contacts that painted a picture of a man who had successfully buried his past while living a quiet life focused on his family. The third document was the most personally significant, as it contained Wei Ming's own assessment of Jessica's potential and his recommendations for her future development. Written in his characteristic precise handwriting, the report detailed his observations of Jessica's psychological profile, her aptitude for various types of training, and his professional judgment about her suitability for intelligence work. The document revealed that her grandfather had been systematically preparing her for exactly the kind of opportunities that were now being offered, with training methods that had been carefully designed to develop capabilities that would be valuable to American intelligence agencies. The most shocking revelation came in the final paragraph of Wei Ming's assessment, where he explicitly recommended that Jessica be recruited for intelligence work when she reached an appropriate age and level of professional development. The recommendation was accompanied by detailed technical specifications for advanced training methods that would build upon the foundation he had provided, suggesting that her grandfather had viewed his instruction not as general preparation for life but as specific preparation for a career in intelligence operations. The documents were accompanied by a letter from Deputy Director Hawkins that placed Jessica's recruitment in the context of her grandfather's legacy and the ongoing value of the relationships that Wei Ming had helped to establish between American and Taiwanese intelligence services. The letter made clear that Jessica's exceptional marksmanship performance had been significant not just because of her individual capabilities, but because it had demonstrated that Wei Ming's training methods had been successful in developing the kind of operatives that modern intelligence work required. The weight of this revelation forced Jessica to completely reevaluate her understanding of her relationship with her grandfather and the nature of the training he had provided. What she had interpreted as general life skills and hobby instruction had actually been systematic preparation for a career that Wei Ming had anticipated and planned for throughout her childhood. The realization was both empowering and unsettling, as it suggested that many of her life choices had been influenced by preparation for a future that she had never consciously chosen. The implications of the documents extended beyond Jessica's personal circumstances to include her understanding of the recruitment process that had been unfolding around her. The various agencies that had expressed interest in her capabilities had not been responding to her performance at Canyon Ridge as an unexpected development, but as the culmination of a process that had been anticipated and planned for by intelligence professionals who had been monitoring her development for years. This understanding transformed Jessica's perception of her career decisions from a choice between different types of federal service to a question of whether she would fulfill the expectations that her grandfather had established for her future. The pressure was both motivating and overwhelming, as it suggested that declining the opportunities being offered would represent not just a personal career decision, but a rejection of her grandfather's legacy and the sacrifices he had made to prepare her for intelligence work. The emotional impact of these revelations was intensified by Jessica's realization that Wei Ming had never explicitly discussed his expectations for her future, leaving her to discover his plans through official documents rather than through family conversations. The absence of direct communication about such significant matters felt like a betrayal, even though Jessica understood that her grandfather's discretion had been necessary for both their safety and the security of ongoing operations. The documents also revealed that Jessica's recruitment was part of a broader effort to develop intelligence capabilities that could operate effectively in the increasingly complex international environment of the 21st century. Her linguistic abilities, cultural knowledge, and technical skills made her particularly valuable for operations involving East Asian targets, and her grandfather's connections provided access to networks that would be difficult for traditional American operatives to penetrate. The strategic importance of Jessica's potential contributions to intelligence operations was emphasized in a supplementary briefing document that outlined current threats and operational requirements in the Pacific region. The document made clear that tensions between China and Taiwan continued to create intelligence challenges that required operatives with deep cultural understanding and established connections to local networks. Jessica's background and training positioned her to contribute to these efforts in ways that would be extremely difficult for other personnel to replicate. The briefing also revealed that Jessica's exceptional marksmanship capabilities were viewed not as an end in themselves, but as evidence of psychological and physical conditioning that would enable her to perform effectively in high-stress, operational environments. The intelligence community's interest in her shooting skills was based on their understanding that such capabilities reflected broader competencies that were essential for field operations involving significant personal risk. The pressure to make a decision about her future became more intense when Jessica learned that several time-sensitive operations were being planned that would benefit from her specific capabilities and background. The urgency was not artificial, but reflected genuine operational requirements that could affect American national security interests in the Pacific region. The knowledge that her decision would have implications beyond her personal career added weight to considerations that were already complex and emotionally challenging. Jessica's response to these revelations was complicated by her growing understanding that accepting intelligence assignments would require her to operate in environments where traditional moral frameworks might not provide clear guidance for decision-making. The documents included frank discussions of operational methods that involved deception, manipulation, and potential violence in service of broader strategic objectives. The ethical complexities of such work were daunting for someone whose federal service had previously been limited to financial investigation and analysis. The challenge of evaluating these ethical considerations was intensified by Jessica's awareness that her grandfather had successfully navigated similar moral complexities throughout his intelligence career while maintaining his personal integrity and commitment to his family. Wei Ming's example suggested that it was possible to serve in intelligence roles without compromising fundamental values, but Jessica was uncertain whether she possessed the psychological resources and moral clarity that such service would require. The decision-making process was further complicated by Jessica's realization that declining the intelligence opportunities would not simply return her to her previous career in financial crimes investigation. Her exceptional performance and the attention it had generated had fundamentally altered her professional profile in ways that would affect all future assignments. Even if she remained in traditional law enforcement, her capabilities would be utilized in specialized roles that differed significantly from routine analytical work. The complexity of her situation was highlighted during a meeting with a representative from the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit, who expressed interest in Jessica's psychological profile and her potential contributions to criminal profiling and investigative psychology. The conversation revealed that her grandfather's training had developed observational and analytical capabilities that extended far beyond marksmanship into areas of human behavior assessment that were valuable for various types of investigative work. The FBI representative, Dr. Amanda Foster, had been particularly interested in Jessica's ability to maintain psychological stability under pressure and her capacity for detailed observation of human behavior patterns. These capabilities, which Jessica had developed through years of meditation and tactical training, were apparently rare among law enforcement personnel and could be extremely valuable for investigations involving complex criminal behavior. "Your psychological evaluation results are quite remarkable," Dr. Foster had observed during their meeting. "The combination of heightened observational capabilities with exceptional emotional control is exactly what we look for in personnel who work on our most challenging cases. Your grandfather appears to have understood principles of psychological development that are normally associated with specialized military training." The conversation with Dr. Foster had revealed yet another dimension of her grandfather's influence on her development and another set of career opportunities that would utilize capabilities she had never fully appreciated. The realization that Wei Ming's training had prepared her for multiple types of specialized federal service suggested that his vision for her future had been broader and more sophisticated than she had previously understood. The weight of these expanding opportunities and responsibilities culminated in a final meeting with Deputy Director Hawkins, who presented Jessica with formal offers from 3 different agencies and a timeline for decision-making that reflected the operational requirements driving her recruitment. The offers included positions with the CIA's Operations Directorate, the FBI's International Operations Division, and a joint task force involving multiple agencies that focused on Pacific region threats. Each offer represented a different approach to utilizing Jessica's capabilities and honoring her grandfather's legacy, but all involved significant personal risk and operational responsibilities that would fundamentally change her relationship with federal service. The decision was not simply about career advancement, but about accepting a level of responsibility for national security that would affect not just her own life, but potentially the lives of many others. The meeting with Hawkins also included a detailed briefing on the current operational environment in the Pacific region and the specific ways that Jessica's capabilities and background could contribute to American intelligence efforts. The briefing made clear that the choice she was being asked to make was not theoretical, but would have immediate implications for operations that were already in planning stages. The urgency of the operational requirements was emphasized by Hawkins's revelation that Chinese intelligence services had become increasingly sophisticated in their efforts to penetrate American operations in the Pacific region, creating a need for operatives who could function effectively in culturally complex environments while maintaining operational security. Jessica's background and training positioned her to contribute to these efforts in ways that would be extremely difficult for other personnel to replicate. The final element of Hawkins's presentation was a personal message that had been recorded by Wei Ming shortly before his death, intended to be delivered to Jessica if she ever faced the decision about whether to pursue intelligence work. The message was brief but profound, expressing Wei Ming's pride in Jessica's achievements and his confidence that she possessed the character and capabilities necessary for intelligence service if she chose to pursue that path. "My dear granddaughter," Wei Ming's voice said from the recording, his accent still heavy after decades in America. "If you are hearing this message, it means that the training I provided has led to opportunities for service that I hoped would come, but could never guarantee. I want you to know that every lesson I taught you was given with love and with faith in your ability to use these capabilities wisely. The choice of how to serve your country must be yours alone, but whatever you decide, I am proud of the woman you have become." The emotional impact of hearing her grandfather's voice and receiving his explicit blessing for intelligence work was overwhelming, but it also provided Jessica with the clarity she needed to make her decision. Wei Ming's message confirmed that her recruitment was the culmination of his life's work and his greatest hope for her future, while also emphasizing that the final choice remained hers to make. The weight of her grandfather's expectations, combined with her own sense of duty and her growing understanding of the operational requirements that her capabilities could address, led Jessica to a decision that would honor both her family legacy and her personal commitment to serving her country. The path forward would be challenging and would require her to develop new capabilities while drawing upon all the training that Wei Ming had provided, but it represented the fullest expression of the potential that he had seen in her and had spent years developing. Jessica's acceptance of the intelligence assignment marked not just a career transition, but a transformation in her understanding of her own identity and purpose. The quiet analyst who had surprised everyone at Canyon Ridge with her marksmanship capabilities was revealing herself to be something far more significant, the inheritor of a legacy of service that connected her to historical events and ongoing responsibilities that were far larger than her individual circumstances. The decision to accept intelligence work also represented Jessica's commitment to honoring her grandfather's memory by using the capabilities he had developed in her to serve the same causes that had motivated his own career in intelligence. The continuity between Wei Ming's service and Jessica's emerging role created a sense of purpose that transcended individual career considerations and connected her to a tradition of sacrifice and service that had shaped international security for decades. As Jessica prepared to begin the advanced training that would prepare her for operational assignments, she reflected on the journey that had brought her from financial analysis to the threshold of intelligence work. The path had been marked by revelations and challenges that had tested her understanding of herself and her capabilities, but it had also revealed the depth of her grandfather's love and the sophistication of his vision for her future. The training that lay ahead would be intensive and demanding, requiring her to develop new skills while refining the capabilities that Wei Ming had instilled in her. The process would test not just her technical abilities, but her psychological resilience and her commitment to the values that had guided her grandfather's service. The outcome would determine whether she could successfully transition from potential to performance in the complex and dangerous world of modern intelligence operations. 18 months after accepting her assignment with the Joint Pacific Intelligence Task Force, Jessica Chun stood on the observation deck of a cargo ship in the South China Sea, her modified pistol concealed beneath a maritime contractor's jacket as she monitored communications that would determine the success of an operation involving 3 governments and countless lives. The woman who had once been dismissed as an awkward analyst had evolved into something that even her grandfather might not have fully anticipated, a bridge between worlds that operated according to different rules, but shared common threats. The operation unfolding around her was the culmination of everything Wei Ming had prepared her for, combining her marksmanship skills with the cultural knowledge and linguistic abilities that made her uniquely valuable for Pacific region operations. The target was a shipping network that had been facilitating arms transfers between North Korean operatives and terrorist organizations throughout Southeast Asia, a threat that required precisely the kind of cultural fluency and operational flexibility that Jessica's background provided. Her role in the operation extended far beyond the marksmanship capabilities that had first attracted attention at Canyon Ridge. Jessica had spent months developing the cover identity of a maritime security consultant, using her analytical background to establish credible expertise while building relationships with shipping industry contacts who could provide access to the criminal networks her team was targeting. The complexity of maintaining deep cover while coordinating with multiple intelligence agencies had tested every aspect of the training that Wei Ming had provided. The transformation from Treasury Department analyst to operational intelligence officer had required Jessica to develop capabilities that went far beyond anything her grandfather had explicitly taught her, but the foundation he had provided had proven remarkably adaptable to the demands of modern intelligence work. The psychological conditioning that enabled her exceptional marksmanship had translated directly into the emotional control necessary for deep cover operations, while the cultural sensitivity he had instilled in her had become essential for navigating the complex political relationships that defined her operational environment. The success of her assignments had established Jessica as one of the most effective operatives in the Pacific Theater, with a track record that included disrupting money laundering networks, identifying terrorist funding sources, and facilitating the capture of several high-value targets. Her combination of analytical expertise, operational capabilities, and cultural knowledge had made her indispensable for operations that required both technical precision and nuanced understanding of regional politics. But success in intelligence work had come with personal costs that Jessica was still learning to navigate. The requirements of maintaining cover identities and operational security had forced her to limit her relationships with civilian friends and family members, creating an isolation that was both necessary for her work and emotionally challenging. The psychological techniques that Wei Ming had taught her for managing stress and maintaining focus had become essential tools for coping with the moral complexities and personal sacrifices that operational intelligence work demanded. The current operation represented a test of all the capabilities that Jessica had developed since accepting her intelligence assignment, as it required her to coordinate with assets from multiple countries while maintaining the maritime contractor identity that provided her access to the criminal network. The stakes were particularly high because the arms trafficking ring her team was targeting had been linked to several terrorist attacks in the Philippines and Indonesia, making its disruption a priority for regional security cooperation. Jessica's position on the cargo ship was both strategically valuable and personally dangerous, as her proximity to the criminal operatives made her vulnerable to exposure while providing essential intelligence about their plans and capabilities. The balance between gathering information and maintaining operational security required constant judgment calls that drew upon every aspect of her training and experience. The communication intercepts that Jessica was monitoring had revealed that the arms shipment was larger and more sophisticated than initial intelligence had suggested, including weapons systems that could pose significant threats to civilian aviation and maritime traffic throughout the region. The discovery had prompted real-time modifications to the operation plan that tested the flexibility and adaptability that were essential characteristics of successful intelligence operatives. As the operation reached its critical phase, Jessica found herself drawing upon the marksmanship skills that had launched her intelligence career, but in ways that Wei Ming had probably never envisioned. Her role required her to provide overwatch protection for team members who were conducting the actual interdiction of the arms shipment, using skills that had been developed for precision shooting competitions in service of operational requirements that could determine the success or failure of an international counter-terrorism effort. The moment when the operation transitioned from surveillance to direct action required Jessica to make split-second decisions about target engagement while maintaining the cover identity that had taken months to establish. The psychological pressure was intense, but the mental conditioning that her grandfather had instilled in her enabled her to maintain operational effectiveness while processing complex tactical information and coordinating with team members whose lives depended on her. Performance. The successful conclusion of the operation resulted in the seizure of weapons worth millions of dollars and the capture of several key figures in the trafficking network, achievements that would significantly disrupt terrorist capabilities throughout Southeast Asia. Jessica's contributions to the operation's success included not just her marksmanship capabilities, but her analytical expertise, cultural knowledge, and ability to maintain operational security under extreme pressure. The recognition that followed the operation's success came not just from her immediate supervisors but from senior officials in multiple governments who understood the strategic importance of the arms trafficking network that had been disrupted. Jessica's role in the operation had demonstrated the value of operatives who could combine traditional intelligence skills with specialized capabilities that were tailored to specific regional requirements. But perhaps more significant than the professional recognition was Jessica's growing understanding of how her grandfather's legacy lived on through her work. The operation had required her to build relationships with Taiwanese intelligence contacts who had worked with Wei Ming during his military service, creating connections that bridged generational and national boundaries in service of shared security objectives. These relationships had provided Jessica with insights into her grandfather's character and achievements that went beyond anything she had learned from official documents. The respect and affection that Wei Ming's former colleagues expressed for his memory had helped Jessica understand that her own service was part of a continuing tradition of cooperation and sacrifice that transcended individual careers and national boundaries. The personal satisfaction that Jessica derived from honoring her grandfather's legacy was balanced by her growing awareness of the responsibilities that came with exceptional capabilities and specialized knowledge. Her success in intelligence operations had established her as a valuable asset for the most challenging assignments, but it had also created expectations for continued performance that would shape the remainder of her career. The evolution from dismissed analyst to elite operative had taught Jessica important lessons about the nature of potential and the ways that exceptional capabilities could remain hidden until circumstances demanded their revelation. Her experience at Canyon Ridge had demonstrated that underestimation could be overcome through performance, but her subsequent intelligence career had shown that true success required sustained excellence and continuous adaptation to changing operational requirements. The relationships that Jessica had developed with other intelligence professionals had provided her with a deeper understanding of the public international cooperation that was essential for addressing global security threats. Her work had connected her to networks of operatives, analysts, and officials who shared common objectives, despite representing different countries and agencies, creating a sense of purpose that transcended narrow institutional loyalties. As Jessica reflected on the journey that had brought her from financial analysis to operational intelligence work, she understood that her grandfather's influence extended far beyond the specific skills he had taught her. Wei Ming's most important lesson had been about the responsibility that came with exceptional capabilities and the importance of using those capabilities in service of causes larger than individual advancement. The marksmanship skills that had first attracted attention to Jessica's potential had proven to be just one element of a much broader set of capabilities that included analytical thinking, cultural sensitivity, psychological resilience, and moral clarity. The integration of these capabilities had enabled her to contribute to intelligence operations that address some of the most significant security challenges facing the international community. The success of her intelligence career had also validated Wei Ming's belief that exceptional capabilities could be developed through systematic training and preparation. but that their effective application required wisdom and judgment that could only be developed through experience and reflection. Jessica's evolution from potential to performance had demonstrated the truth of her grandfather's teachings while extending them into contexts that he could never have fully anticipated. Looking toward the future, Jessica understood that her career would continue to evolve as new threats emerged and operational requirements changed. The foundation that Wei Ming had provided would remain essential, but its application would require constant adaptation and learning. The woman who had once fumbled her rifle in front of skeptical instructors had become someone who could navigate the most complex operational environments while maintaining the values and principles that her grandfather had instilled in her. The transformation was complete, but the journey continued. Jessica Chun had found her place in a world that required extraordinary capabilities, deployed in service of ordinary human values, security, freedom, and the protection of innocent people from those who would do them harm. Her grandfather's legacy lived on not just in her achievements, but in her commitment to using her capabilities wisely and well. The range officer who had laughed at her unconventional grip could never have imagined that those 20 perfect shots would launch a career that spanned continents and contributed to international security operations. But perhaps Wei Ming had known, in the way that exceptional teachers sometimes understand the full potential of their students, before the students themselves recognize it. In quiet moments between operations, Jessica still practiced the meditation techniques her grandfather had taught her, using them to maintain the psychological balance that her work required. The orthodox cross that had once belonged to Wei Ming remained with her, not as a repository of secrets, but as a reminder of the sacrifices that had made her opportunities possible. The story that had begun with underestimation and ridicule had evolved into something far more significant, a demonstration of how exceptional potential could be realized through preparation, opportunity, and the courage to reveal capabilities when circumstances demanded it. Jessica's journey from hidden talent to operational excellence had honored her grandfather's memory while creating a legacy of her own that would inspire future generations of intelligence professionals. The mouse had indeed found her roar, and the sound echoed across oceans and through the corridors of power where decisions were made that affected the security of nations. But more importantly, Jessica had discovered that true excellence was not just about individual achievement, but about using exceptional capabilities to serve purposes larger than oneself, a lesson that her grandfather had embedded in every aspect of her training. As she prepared for her next assignment, Jessica understood that the story that had begun at Canyon Ridge was really just the opening chapter of a much longer narrative about service, sacrifice, and the ways that exceptional individuals could make a difference in an uncertain world. The 20 perfect shots had been just the beginning. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.